so again, thank you all for joining us here tonight. Tonight's talk is called Ghosts of the Berkshires. Before it became a haven for arts and culture, the Berkshires in western Massachusetts was a rugged, sparsely populated frontier. From the early days of revolutionary fervor and industrial enterprise to today's tourism, many chilling stories remain. A lost girl haunts a cemetery in Washington, and mysterious spirits still perform at Tanglewood. From the ghostly halls of the Houghton Mansion to the eerie events at the Hoosac Tunnel, residents and visitors alike have felt fear and awe in these hills, telling tales of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and spectral trains. Author Robert Oakes, who has given ghost tours at the Mount, which is Edith Wharton's home, in Lenox for more than a decade, will lead this spirited journey through history. And again, tonight's presentation is sponsored by the Friends of the Tewksbury Library. So all 75 of us or so watching live on Zoom, and I'm sure the hundreds that will watch after the fact on demand on YouTube, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Robert for joining us here tonight. And Robert, you can take it from one Robert to another. You can take it
right.
away.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. This is Robert. And thank you so much, Friends of Tewksbury Library, and for all of you who are here tonight watching. I really appreciate you being here. It's a very exciting time for me. This is my first book, actually. It just came out last month, and I had, as Robert said, been leading the ghost tours at the Mount, telling the stories about this home for 10 years to many, many hundreds of people who have come through on our ghost tours. And I have been sort of very well acquainted with the lore of this place. And this book was my opportunity to sort of reach out into this entire Berkshire region and see what other stories are out there. And, you know, I do want to just give you a little background if you may not be familiar with the Mount and with Edith Wharton, who was its famous resident and designer and lived here for 10 years between 1902 and 1911. And so, and in fact, we have, among many things here at the museum, we have some of her own writing that you can see, her handwriting here, which is pretty cool to see. This is where she would do a lot of her writing, right here in this room and in this on this floor where I am right now. And Edith Wharton, one of our great writers, wrote many books in her writing career, wrote The House of Mirth, wrote The Age of Innocence, and wrote Ethan Frome, some of her best known works. But something that isn't very well known about Edith Wharton is that she also wrote ghost stories during her writing career. And in fact, I have a collection here of Edith Wharton's ghost stories. And this is not something that a lot of people know about Edith Wharton, but in fact, she was quite interested in the paranormal and in ghosts and ghost stories, and had some very interesting ideas about them. Now, with Wharton, it actually began with a phobia, with a deep-seated fear of ghost stories that began when she was a child. When she was 9 years old, she contracted typhoid fever, and it almost killed her. It took her quite a long time to recover, and she was almost fully recovered when she was given a book of ghost stories, or actually a book of short stories that included a ghost story. Well, she read this ghost story, and she later recalled that this story, after reading this story, she was plunged back into what she described as a world haunted by formless horrors. And she actually suffered a relapse, and she nearly died once again from the typhoid. And from that moment on, she felt as though something, what she described as dark and undefinable menace, was forever dogging her steps. She felt as though something that was threatening seemed to be following her wherever she went. And this fear of and anxiety about this followed her right through her teen years, well into her 20s, so much so that if she knew that there was a book of ghost stories anywhere in her home, it had to be burned or she couldn't sleep. And now, Wharton was always a lover of books. And so for her to talk about wanting to burn books, you know that there's something in those stories that was deeply troubling to Edith Wharton. But I think it's so interesting that as a writer, she decided to take on this fear and actually try to kind of work it through and face it through her writing. And as I said, wrote many wonderful ghost stories during her career. And I also think that it's so interesting that this home that she built and that she lived in became known over the years as a place haunted by ghosts. and has inspired so many stories of reports. So I'm going to start up my presentation now, and I'm going to show you some pictures. So you'll see, for a moment, you'll see a picture of our dog, Oscar. He is going to make a sudden appearance. So here we go. We're going to start up this broadcast, and I'm going to show you Edith Wharton's house. And I don't know how many of you may have made your way out to the Berkshires, but we're way out in Western Massachusetts, almost at the New York border. And this is me sort of doing some of my work here with a group that was here last fall, leading some of our tours. But here we are. This is Edith Wharton's house, the Mount. And as you can see, it's a beautiful, big estate built between 1901 and 1902, and filled with many rooms and beautiful gardens outside. And there's a stable, which is said to be quite haunted. Many stories about the stable, and of course, many stories within the home itself. But here you have this home built by this woman who had this kind of fear and phobia of ghosts that has inspired so many stories and reports and evidence. So here I'm showing you a picture of one of the pieces of evidence that was captured actually during one of our first ghost tours here, one of our very first season of ghost tours. And you can see this is a photograph of the drawing room here at the house. And there appears to be a shadow figure in the middle of the picture. It seems to be an image of a woman. Many people see a woman in this image looking toward the crowd, which you can see on the right-hand side of the room, as they exit the room and head into the dining room. Now, some people look at this and think it must have been a shadow on the wall or something like that, but it's really hard to say because, you know, if you look carefully, that image seems to block the light that's against the wall. And so it appears as though this image, this figure, is actually occupying space in front of the light. And so this is just one of the many pieces of evidence that have been captured here at the house that has given rise to the Mount's reputation as a haunted location. And but one of the things I always ask people when they come on a ghost tour here is, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe that ghosts actually exist? Or are they merely these sort of imagined entities in stories, you know, things that don't actually exist, but we tell stories about them? And I know you're not here. I would ask you by show of hands how many of us believe in ghosts. And then what I would do, what I often do on my ghost tours, is I sort of pull the rug out from the whole question because I present what it is that Edith Wharton said on the subject. What she said was that the question of whether or not you believe in ghosts is actually pointless, that it doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what you feel. She said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I am afraid of them. She goes on to explain that belief is a conscious act of the intellect. It's a rational process. It's something that goes on in your mind. But where we experience ghosts is something much deeper, something what she described as the warm darkness of the prenatal fluid far below our conscious reason. She said that is where the faculty dwells with which we apprehend the ghost when we may not be endowed with the gift of seeing. She goes on to describe this faculty as what she calls the ghost instinct. And in my opinion, she connects it with the imagination, that this is something that allows us to see and feel and intuit things that our senses and our rational intellect may not be quite capable of capturing, but there's something there nevertheless. And Wharton, I think, felt that ghost stories are actually quite good for the imagination, which is something that moderns have begun to lose, the ability to imagine. With all of the things, the technology, and at her time, and this was over 100 years ago, what she called the wireless in the cinema, the radio and films, but other things that kind of like take away the job, our job to form images and to concentrate and sort of meditate on an experience to the point where we begin to sense the unseen. She said that we were in danger of actually losing that ability with all of these demands on our attention. And so we needed a way, if we were going to experience the ghost, we need ways to strengthen that imagination. And she felt that ghost stories were actually quite good at doing exactly that, that they allowed us to connect with these unseen entities just beyond where our intellect and our senses can detect them. And so naturally, she felt ghost stories were good. And so so this, my experience here leading these tours grew naturally into this opportunity to venture off the grounds of the Mount, which I know very well and know the stories here so well, and begin to look for the stories of this entire region, the Berkshires. And there are so many, there are so many stories. And what I was looking for was places that seemed to, because of something about their presence, something about their location, something about the quality, the experience that people have there, has inspired many, many stories over the years. And those became the places I focused on for the book. And I divided up the book in various ways that I thought was representative of the Berkshires. So there are 5 sections of the book. The first one is Ghosts in the Hills. And, because nature is such an important element here in the Berkshires, and there are so many of these kind of natural landscapes, natural landmarks that are said to have resident ghosts. And when you go there, which I tried to do with every piece that I wrote, tried to go to that place to see what it felt like to be there, try to pick up something of the presence of the place. You can feel a presence, you can feel something there, and many of them really are quite evocative. And so I'm going to share with you an excerpt from the book about the place known as the Hoosac Tunnel. And this one is quite well known. It's one of, I would say, one of the best known of the Berkshire haunted sites. It's way up in North County, up close to the Vermont border. And it was built over the course of 25 years between the mid to late 1800s. And it was quite hazardous. It was quite catastrophic, actually. Of the 800 men who worked on it, a quarter of them died in explosions and collapses, so much so that it became known as a cursed project. People really began to feel that there was something quite dangerous and quite deadly, actually, about this location. But they bored a hole from 2 sides of the mountain. They met in the middle. The entire tunnel is about 5 miles long, and they also built a central shaft down from the top. And just the amount of time and money, and of course the human toll, was really quite extraordinary. And it really stands out to me when you go to this location. And many people do. It's a tourist attraction. People go there just to look at the tunnel. You see into this dark void. You just stand there and look into the darkness. And if you get close enough, you can kind of feel the cold air coming out of the mountain. And that alone is enough to make you start to feel the sense of presence of spirits just beyond the veil. But of course, what's helped by it is the many stories that have been told about this. So I'm going to read a passage from the book that tells you a little bit more about what has been reported at this site. The wretched nature and sheer danger of the work required to build the tunnel certainly did not help the project's reputation. To pierce a hole through the mountain meant the excavation of 2 million tons of rock, a grim and daunting task, especially given the technology that was available at the time. The workmen's first solution was to use a state-of-the-art tunnel boring machine, which failed after the first 10 feet. Undaunted, the workmen persisted, gnawing inch by inch into the ancient stone with a pneumatic drill, gunpowder, pickaxes, and shovels. In 1865, progress was accelerated with the introduction of nitroglycerin, but because it was an extremely unstable explosive, it brought new dangers and led to the first widely reported disaster at the site. On March 20th, 1865, explosive experts Ringo Kelly, Ned Brinkman, and Billy Nash set a charge and ran for cover, though only Kelly made it back to the bunker alive. It seems he ignited the charge prematurely, burying the others beneath a ton of fallen rock. Kelly was not seen again until 1 year later, when he was found strangled to death at the very spot where the explosion had occurred. No one was ever charged with the crime, though many workers believed it was the angry ghosts of Brinkman and Nash who had taken revenge on Kelly that night. Shortly after this incident occurred, many men began to report hearing the sound of disembodied voices and cries of agony coming from deep inside the rock. Many refused to enter the tunnel after sunset, and still others walked off the project completely, slowing the pace of progress to a crawl. Though officials insisted the sound was that of wind howling through the tunnel, the men were not satisfied. So investigators were brought in to search the tunnel in an attempt to calm the workmen's fears. This plan backfired, though, as the investigators themselves reported hearing the unsettling sound of groans in the deep, cold dark, which they believed were not caused by wind. In spite of the many disasters and delays, the tunnel project was at last completed, though at a much higher cost in both time and money than anyone had anticipated. But it was the human cost that cut the deepest. In all, nearly 200 of the project's roughly 800 workmen died, mostly in explosions and collapses. Tales of their ordeals and gruesome deaths and reports of lingering spirits in the dark have continued to haunt the surrounding hills ever since, attracting ghost seekers who report bizarre experiences of their own. One local hunter claimed to hear strange voices that lured him into the opening, where he said he was accosted by entities that left him battered and beaten. Others claim to have seen odd lights, orbs, and phantom figures, and they claim to have heard the sounds of muffled voices and heavy wet footsteps along the rails. Some especially bold adventurers have even dared to walk the entire 5 miles of the tunnel from end to end. Several claim to feel as if something unseen walked behind or beside them, but it is certainly not advisable to walk the length of the tunnel. Several trains still pass through every day, and that light you see coming towards you on the tracks may not be a ghostly miner after all. Now this, as I said, this location is really quite powerful. When you go there, you can feel it. You can just feel the presence there. Now, the next section in the book is on the houses. There are many of these historic homes here in the Berkshires. The Berkshires was a scene of quite a lot of construction of what sort of cutely, I think, were called cottages. These massive summer homes built by the very wealthy, mostly from places like New York City and Boston, were coming out here during the era between what's known as the Gilded Age, between roughly the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the First World War, and building these lavish summer homes. And they would come out here to live for usually just the summer months between May and October. And the Whartons were included in this. The Whartons came here. Teddy Wharton, Edith Wharton's husband, was actually from the Boston area. Edith Wharton had grown up in New York City, but the two of them came here in 1901 and began construction of the Mount, their summer home. They were only here, as I said, for 10 years. This was a picture I took one night as we were getting ready for a ghost tour, and the storm rolled in. It was really quite evocative, especially when you look closely. Many people see what appears to be a dog or some other kind of creature in the clouds, which makes sense. Wharton loved little dogs, and just little dogs, just of that very breed. So it's sort of interesting that people see that image in that picture. But this house, as I said, many, many stories about sightings here at the Mount. And so I will share with you an excerpt from the book. Now, the Mount, in addition to being the Whartons' home, also was the home of Shakespeare and Company, the theater group that's now located in the town of Lenox. And also it was a girls' boarding school for many years. So stories of hauntings at this location go back from at least the days of the girls' boarding school. There's reason to wonder whether a dark menace remained at the Mount after the Whartons' departure. For as the years passed, the estate began to develop a reputation. People began to talk about its ghosts. Some of the earliest reports came from the students of Foxhollow School, who claimed to have conversations with the ghost of a woman in the cupola stairwell in the attic. According to the 1986 book, The Ghostly Register by Arthur Myers, another student said she witnessed an apparition in a white lace dress moving along the terrace and believed it to be the spirit of Wharton herself. In those years, she recalled, there were many rumors of the author's presence. Some claimed to hear her typing. Others said every creak was Wharton walking the halls. Years later, members of Shakespeare and Company reportedly witnessed some very dramatic sightings. According to the Ghostly Register, the company's founder, Tina Packer, described waking one stormy night to find the figure of a ponytailed man standing with his back to her in the center of the room. After calling out to him, she said, the figure turned and looked at her, and it was at that moment she knew it was a ghost. Frightened, she pulled the covers up over her head, and when she summoned the courage to look again, the figure was gone. Now, since the days of Shakespeare and Company, there have been many reports of shadowy figures at the Mount. They have been seen in the main house, as well as in some of the outbuildings on the property. Staff seems, there was one report where a man said he saw what appeared to be the figure, a shadow figure of a man on the top floor of the stable. He was so upset by this, the workmen had to take the rest of the day off. Another one of our tour guides said she saw this figure on the wall of Teddy Wharton's den, and it appeared as though this figure was actually standing and kind of lurking right behind her. And she was quite scared of that until the figure just suddenly vanished. And so this is the kind of thing that is often reported here at the house, many different kinds of images. It seems fitting that the home of a ghost story writer who feared the genre and also seemed to relish it should continue to inspire so many tales. If the dark, undefinable menace that haunted Wharton's imagination as a child did indeed follow her to the Mount, it has ultimately had a very positive effect. It has made storytellers out of the countless residents, employees, and visitors who, like Wharton, have felt both frightened by and attracted to the disquieting delight of a good ghost story. Now, of course, the Berkshires are well known and have been for a very long time as a tourist location, as a place to go to vacation. And so naturally we have many inns, and some of them here are quite old. And you may have heard of the Red Lion Inn. It's probably our best known inn here. And there's been an inn on its site, on its location, where it currently stands at the intersection of Street and Route 7 in Stockbridge since at least the 1770s. So it's quite old, quite historic. And as you can imagine, quite haunted. And there are many stories about ghosts in the Red Lion Inn, but particularly in room 301. And, you know, it was sort of fun while I was researching for this. I started to look around online and came across a number of travel site, you know, like sort of review sites that had reports from people who'd stayed at this inn and in this particular room, reporting all sorts of things that they experienced in that room. And there were so many of them over the span of years and so many different kinds of reports that I just really found that pretty amazing, actually, that people who did not know each other and were coming years apart from one another, all were having these strange experiences in room 301. Perhaps the inn's most notorious guest is the ghost said to haunt room 301, a cheerful little room at the end of the third floor hallway. It is this ghostly resident, along with other reported apparitions and occurrences, that make the Red Lion Inn a favorite haunt of paranormal investigators and psychic mediums. A glance at an online travel site reveals a number of eerie accounts that are said to have occurred in room 301, including reports of sheets and toes tugged, gentle touches on the head and face, scratches on the hand, and even an unseen entity entering the room and climbing into bed. More than one reviewer also mentioned seeing an apparition of a man in a top hat. Over the years, a number of paranormal investigators have sought to verify these claims. Berkshire folklorist Joe Derwin, who writes about local mysteries on his blog These Mysterious Hills, once checked himself into the infamous room 301 to conduct his own investigation. During the night, he claimed he experienced certain electrical fluctuations while using an EMF detector, which revealed high spikes between the bed and armoire. Another pair of ghost investigators, Joseph Flammer and Diane Hill, who are called the paranormal investigators, also reported odd anomalies and unexplained phenomena while staying in room 301. They claimed that a video camera that was left running through the night recorded 18 distinct knocks, mostly emanating from the armoire. They claimed that a camera also captured a hazy figure that moved past the mirror at 2 a.m. and that something else crossed the room and struck the camera's tripod. The dowsing rods they were using at one point crossed above a cold spot, and a question they posed to the darkness, "Is there a spirit here in the room with us?" seemed to be answered by knocks from inside the armoire. At one point, they said its doors actually began to creak open on their own. While room 301 does appear to be an especially active room, reports of strangeness at the Red Lion Inn are not confined to that location. In room 424, for example, one guest reported feeling that something was standing over her bed. Another guest asked to be moved to a different room because of the many disturbances he experienced during the night. Others have claimed to see the apparition of a girl with flowers in her hand, and another visitor said she felt an unseen hand brush against her while walking down the stairs into the first floor parlor. According to a former housekeeper, much of the cleaning staff believes the entire fourth floor of the inn is haunted. So how does the management of the Red Lion Inn feel about these reports? They seem to enjoy the mystery of it all. In response to the question of whether the inn is haunted, they wrote on their website, "After 235 years, that's a lot of guests, and old buildings do make strange noises, so there are a lot of rumors and stories. Are they true? Why not decide for yourself and let us know if you see anything?" And I think that's really, it brings up this issue. I think it wasn't very long ago when different, places that, in the tourism industry didn't necessarily promote their ghosts. In fact, they may have wanted to keep them hidden because they were afraid it would be bad for business. But now I think the opposite is true. I think many places embrace their ghosts, and actually people want to go to these places because they're believed to be haunted. So I think that's certainly true here. Now, here in the Berkshires, we have a number of graveyards, as we have, of course, throughout all of New England. There are graveyards everywhere, right? And that is true here. And as I was because of that, I wanted to include a section on graveyards. But what I found as I started to look around was that there actually aren't a lot of graveyards in the Berkshires that are believed to be haunted. There are some that are quite interesting, including the Sedgwick Pie, where there is this sort of concentric rings of the Sedgwick family. They're all buried in circles around their forebears, Theodore and Patricia, but it's not believed to be haunted. And so I had to dig a little deeper to find stories of haunted graveyards. And there is one, the Church on the Hill Cemetery in Lenox, right here in the town that we're in, which is in fact the cemetery where Teddy Wharton, Edith Wharton's husband, is buried. It is believed to be haunted by the ghost of a woman named Hannah Leidig. Now, I don't know quite who Hannah Leidig was, but she was believed to have died in the 1930s and buried in the cemetery. And people say they have seen her ghost moving among the tombstones, and there are reports of seeing her face in the window of the church. But I think actually an even more interesting haunted cemetery here in the Berkshires is what's known as the Lost Cemetery of West Branch Road, which can be found up on October Mountain. And October Mountain is now a nature preserve, but it was once actually, in the earliest days, it was where there were many farmers and woodcutters who lived up there. Later on, the entire mountain was purchased by William Whitney, who at the time was the Secretary of the Navy under Grover Cleveland. And this man had, I think, 10 properties throughout the world, but he wanted his own game preserve. So he bought the entire October Mountain and stocked it with wild game, with moose and other kinds of animals that he could hunt. And he built an estate there called the Antlers. But before Whitney's time there were people living up on the mountain. And some of these people laid down a cemetery in the early 1800s that's come to be known as the West Branch Road Cemetery. And it is believed to be haunted by the spirit of a 10-year-old girl whose tombstone you can see there. And it's believed that her spirit haunts that cemetery. But for me, the cemetery is such a beautiful, sad, and peaceful location that can be difficult to find. You have to drive out into the woods, some rocky dirt roads, and you have to kind of go out searching for it. But once you find it, you know where it is, and then you always know where it is. And it's really quite beautiful and worth a visit, tucked away up there in the woods on October Mountain. But I do want to talk now about the spiritual and artistic communities that are to be found here in the Berkshires. Of course, the Berkshires have been well known as the home of Tanglewood, for example, the summer home of Boston Symphony, and Jacob's Pillow, the dance festival, Berkshire Theater Festival. There are many of these artistic organizations out here in the Berkshires, as well as all the museums and so forth. And it has also been a place where it has attracted many spiritual communities over the years. And it was actually one of the first American homes of the Shakers here in the United States. And so Hancock Shaker Village, which is here in the Berkshires, also known as a haunted location. But I want to focus in on Tanglewood. Tanglewood is right here in Lenox, and it was, as I said, the summer home of the Boston Symphony, and is believed to be haunted. And there are many stories that include experiences reported by Leonard Bernstein, very famous composer and conductor who had a residency at Tanglewood for many years. And so there is quite a lot of history there. And I love the story of Bernstein. So let me share that with you. Bernstein himself, and I should point out that there's two homes at Tanglewood, historic homes. One of them is Tanglewood, which was so named by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And the other one is called Highwood. And Highwood is considered to be really the first of the Berkshire cottages, the summer homes. And so it's Highwood that I'll tell you about now. This one is believed to be haunted. Bernstein himself was said to have encountered the Highwood ghost on the infamous second floor between 1986 and his death in 1990. The celebrated composer and conductor used one of those rooms as an office. It was there in 1990, just 2 months before he died, that he reportedly leapt from his seat, threw his hands up toward the ceiling and shouted, "What is it that's there? Who is it that's there?" BSO volunteer Barbara Greenbaum said Lenny really believed in ghosts. He really did. She went on to describe a kind of musical seance that Bernstein arranged shortly after his eerie encounter. Greenbaum explained Bernstein and composer Andre Previn, around the time of Bernstein's death, came up to the top floor of Highwood Manor at midnight to play Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart to try to summon the ghosts. No spirit appeared to the men that night, Greenbaum said, but people love the story. It's just fun to think that these two giants of music loved it and believed it so much that they snuck in here at night to try to make contact. Composer John Williams, who recently composed a piece titled Highwood's Ghost to celebrate this encounter, also affirmed Bernstein's belief. I well remember one night, he wrote, as Lenny was making his way up the first stairwell, exclaiming, "This place is haunted." It may be expected that Lenny, genius that he was, might have had a special ability to receive transmission from the sphere of spirits and signs. Indeed, the Highwood ghost encounter was not the first transmission Bernstein was said to have experienced at Tanglewood. Former assistant Charlie Harmon, in his memoir On the Road and Off the Record with Leonard Bernstein, wrote that the famed musician was noticeably upset after conducting a performance of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3. He said to me, in the second movement, a funeral march, I saw somebody walking across the back of the stage. I wondered why anybody would be back there. Who was it? I asked. Cousy, LB said, his face suddenly drawn, the lines going deep. I stopped what I was doing. Dr. Kusevitsky, founder of Tanglewood, died in 1951. I'm certain of it. It was Cousy, LB said. Interestingly, Harmon went on to write that on this particular night, there was a, quote, astrological convergence, a once in a million years alignment of stars and planets, which inspired Bernstein and others to stay up late to absorb this exceptional energy, which was predicted to peak at 4 a.m. Is it possible that on this night of cosmic alignment, that particular piece of music performed in that rarefied location, conducted by a man said to be especially attuned to the sphere of spirits and signs, may have revealed a momentary glimpse of the other world in the form of Cousy's ghost? Was this what led Bernstein and Previn to venture up to the top floor of Highwood at midnight some years later to try to summon up the spirit with song? If so, why did it not seem to work that night? Could it have been that they chose the wrong piece? BSO volunteer Gabe Kozakov seemed to think so. He commented, they should have played Beethoven Opus 70 No. 1, the Ghost Trio. Well, it's just a little of the sampling of the stories that we have to tell here. And, but I love Wharton's, I think of her as a kind of guide when it comes to experiencing ghosts, and telling stories about ghosts, because I think that she really emphasized the need to, first of all, quiet our surroundings and remove all of the distractions. She said that silence and continuity were essential elements in experiencing ghosts, that there's something very subtle and gossamer about them, and they can be easily lost if disturbed, but that we should really focus in on these quiet moments in these places of presence and try to engage with them using our ghost instinct, using our imagination. And then if we do, that we should then tell stories about them. She said that the ghost should never forget that his only chance of survival is in the story that people tell about him. And so I hope that if you experience something like this, that you will tell your own stories and keep this lore going, because it's a living thing that we need to feed to keep alive. And so let me just bring this back here to me. So give me 1 second here. And where are we here? There we go. I'm going to stop that. And I'm back. Here I am. Okay. And I think it's so really special actually to be here tonight in Edith Wharton's home, being able to broadcast to you from this room. In fact, we have stories about this very room that we're in. There was a woman who lived here during the days of Shakespeare and Company who said that she woke in the middle of the night to find that the room had become ice cold and it had turned kind of a blue color. She said she looked over to the mantle, which is to my left over here, and she said she saw 3 figures standing there, dressed from the turn of the century, 2 men and a woman. And she could see that they were sort of in conversation, but she couldn't hear any sound. She just saw the movement. She just saw the bodies, the hands moving, the mouth moving. And she said that was creepy enough. But then she said, as she watched, they stopped what they were doing and they gradually seemed to become aware of her presence and sort of turned toward her. And all of them, all 3 at the same time, just looked right at her in the bed. She covered her head with the blankets. Later on, she peered out and she got the nerve to look out again, and she said they were gone. She fell asleep, and in the morning she woke to find that the room had become normal temperature and, nothing strange. This is one of the many stories. Now, people often ask me if I've had experiences here, and I want to share with you actually a piece of audio that was captured. This was a group that came to the house last fall, and they were doing, it was a paranormal conference. They actually, was Sam Baltrusis, who I think, as I know, has presented to the library before. He brought a group of investigators, psychics, and writers, people who write about ghosts, to the house for a late night tour. This was a wonderful experience for me because, I was with a group of people who were quite well seasoned, had done a lot of these investigations. So my question of, do you believe in ghosts, really didn't need to be asked. And it was really wonderful because they were sort of sharing with me many of the things that they were experiencing in the house. Now, one of the things that happened that night is that they were doing what's known as EVP work. And one of the men was using an audio recorder, and we asked questions of the room. Now, they all said to me, you should ask the questions because you've been here for so long. They know you, they'll talk to you. They felt absolutely certain that they would speak with me. And so I thought, I never actually did that before. I've never spoken directly to them. So, all right, I'll give it a shot. Now, I asked a number of questions, and as often happens with these EVP sessions, there was utter silence in the room. We didn't hear anything. But when we played back the recording later on, when we went back downstairs, we heard something. So I'm going to play this for you now. You'll hear my voice say, do you know my name? And then you'll hear something else.
Do you know my name?
I'll play it again. Now, again, there was total silence. So whatever that sound is that follows my question, we did not hear in the room.
Do you know my name?
Now, it's gravelly, it's a little distorted, but to my ear, it sounds like a voice saying Robert. And it still gives me the chills. I mean, it's just eerie, because the thought of them being present here is one thing, but the thought of them knowing you, knowing your name, speaking to you, that takes it to a whole other level for me. So that was quite powerful interaction. That still gives me the chills. So I think this is probably a good time to open it up to some questions. I'd love to take your questions, and if I can answer them, happy to answer them. So I think, Robert, are you coming back in, or?
Yes,
Okay.
I am back, and I just want to acknowledge we did have some folks join us late. Just want to let folks know that I will send out a link to this recording, the complete video. So if anyone joined us, say at 6:45 or 7 o'clock, I will be sending out a link to the complete recording. So get your questions into the chat. That would be great. Cheryl says, I grew up in the Berkshires, have been to many of these places, and I've never heard about these ghosts. How do you discover the places where ghosts are reported?
Well, having lived here for a while, you sort of just hear the stories in the air. So I was aware of the fact that some of these places were haunted, though I hadn't yet, before I did the book, I hadn't yet sort of really dug in and researched. And so, a lot of it was just sort of making a list of the places that I already had heard about, some of the well-known places like Hoosac Tunnel or Mount Greylock. And after that, it was a matter of doing some research. So for example, this book here, Ghosts of Old Berkshire, which is written by a man named Willard Douglas Coxey, who lived in Egremont. And he wrote this book in the 1930s and kept alive a lot of the older lore. So a lot of these stories come from colonial, pre-colonial, and Revolutionary War times. And so his book really kept alive a lot of those stories about the undead Hessian of Egremont and other stories like that. So those were sources. Joe Derwin's blog, who I mentioned in my book, he's been keeping an archive of all of these wonderful stories for well over a decade here in the Berkshires. Then you do some research, you dig into newspapers, you look online. One of the fun things was to sort of find comment threads and people mentioning other locations that I hadn't heard of before. I found the Mallory homestead in New Ashford this way. I was actually looking for a story about the alleged ghost of Lenox Library. Didn't find much about that, but was led toward this other story about the Mallory homestead. It was really quite something. So that was a fun process.
Rhonda says, have you come across any Henry James haunts? I know he was great friends with Edith Wharton and stayed at the Mount.
Yeah, and also, one of his best known stories is a ghost story, The Turn of the Screw. And Wharton considered that to be a masterful ghost story, actually. Edith Wharton, Henry James, as you said, were friends, and he visited her here. And there is actually a story from the years of Shakespeare and Company. Somebody said they reported seeing two figures sitting beside the fire in the library that they described as Edith Wharton and Henry James. And it looked as though they were having like a poetry reading. And somebody said they heard a woman's voice say the name Henry. So that's about all I have on Henry James, and that's all I've heard about the possibility that he was here.
So that question was from Rhonda. Lori would like to know, are there any haunted areas in the forests around Pittsfield?
Oh, in the forest around Pittsfield. Okay, let me think about that for a second, because certainly Mount Greylock is known as haunted. It's a little bit north of Pittsfield, but that area. Pontoosuc Lake, it's not in the forest, but Pontoosuc Lake is alleged to be haunted. I'm trying to think though of the forests around the Wizard's Glen, which is in Dalton. But I'm not sure actually about forests surrounding Pittsfield. It's a good question.
So Lori says she would love to do a tour with you, and just to follow up on that, Lenny is inquiring about your tours. Do you have tours all years, and on what days? And did you take this opportunity to plug tomorrow night?
Yeah, so I hope that you'll join us. This is, of course, with this need to go online, it has been a challenge for all of us. But it has also given us the opportunity here at the Mount to take our ghost tour and bring it online. And so we do it actually this way through Zoom. We're doing one tonight, as Robert pointed out, at 8 o'clock. But we're also doing a special investigation and ghost tour. Tomorrow night, we'll have actually the man who captured that audio I played for you. His group will be coming up from New Jersey to do an investigation live here at the house. They'll bring a psychic with them as well. And they'll be investigating. And then I'll be telling the ghost stories as well. And so that's tomorrow night. We're doing two tours, one at 8 o'clock of the stable, and one at 10:30 of the house. And so you can go to edithwharton.org, which is our website. You can register for one of them or both of them. So you can spend the whole evening with us if you like, from basically 8 p.m. until midnight, listening to the tour, going through the spaces, seeing much more of this estate than what you're currently seeing, and also checking in with the paranormal investigation group to see what they might be finding. He feels quite confident that he will find things tomorrow night.
Great. Elizabeth would like to know, what is the Mount Greylock story that you referred to?
It's the story of the old coot, and this is a Civil War soldier who, the story is that he went off to war, and it was believed that he had died, and so his wife remarried and moved on without him, but he didn't die, and he came back to find that his family had moved on without him, and he didn't want to ruin their happiness, so he decided to stay apart, stay alone, build a cabin on the woods, and live there alone for the rest of his life. He did die, and then it was believed that his ghost haunted the mountain, and it's still believed that his spirit is there. It's an interesting story. It's one that it seems as though there's sort of an interesting newspaper article from the 1930s that promotes a ski race on the mountain. This seems to be the first mention of the old coot. And it is interesting because the newspaper story actually says exactly when to see the old coot. That he's going to be at the end of this particular trail at a certain time of day, that you'll see the coot there, which has led some people to believe that the whole thing was just a hoax that somebody made up. Nevertheless, the story is really quite good. And whether that story is true or not, certainly Mount Greylock is a powerfully evocative location that has, as I say, this strong presence about it.
Let's see. So that question was from Elizabeth. Brian would like to know, any spirits know to frequent Wacona Park in Pittsfield?
Not to my knowledge, but that doesn't mean that they don't. It's just I haven't come across stories about Wacona Park. But I would check actually Joe Derwin's blog if you're curious, These Mysterious Hills. And he's been cataloging quite a lot of the lore of this area, and he may have some sense of what's out there.
Rhonda says, I spent a lot of time in Richmond as a kid. Are there any stories specific to Richmond? Again,
not that I found. And I really wanted to try to find at least one story from each town, but there weren't a lot coming out of certain towns. I didn't see much of Richmond, but again, that doesn't mean that they're not there. And if you know of any, or if anybody knows of any, please do send them to me, because I want to know about them.
Lynn would like to know, are there any stories about the Houghton Mansion?
Yes, the Houghton Mansion is well known as a haunted location, and it is included in the book. And there is a story of tragedy there where the family went out for a car ride up into Vermont. There was a horrific accident. The car tumbled over down an embankment, and the daughter died, her friend died, and then later on, Houghton himself died about a week later. And the driver, a man named John Witters, felt so responsible for this that he committed suicide, actually. And so people believe that his spirit, the spirit of the daughter, the Houghton himself, may haunt this location. There's quite a sad and kind of tragic feeling about that location. It's no longer open. It used to be that it was open for tours. It's now under new ownership, and they don't do investigations there anymore. But there's quite a lot out there about the Houghton Mansion. So if you look it up, you'll find stories about it for sure.
Lynn wants to know, do you have any perspective on the alleged alien encounters in the Berkshires?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a really quite interesting story. And I went down to Sheffield before that piece came out on Unsolved Mysteries. And there's been a number of monuments set up there when the site where this was said to have happened, near the covered bridge. One was placed there and then removed. And now there's another sort of a park there with a number of different plaques and things set up. And, I did watch that episode recently, and wow, I didn't know actually that there were other encounters that same night, that apparently whatever this was may have kind of swooped through the entire region and encountered by multiple people. It's quite an eerie story. I don't know that I know any more about it than what is out there in the Unsolved Mysteries episode and some stories that are available online.
Rachel wants to know, how do you feel about being at the house tonight on All Hallows Eve?
This is the right time to be here. I mean, this is when we feel veil is most thin, right? Tonight and tomorrow night. And, you know, I actually love it. I mean, you know, it's like, where would you rather be on Halloween than at a haunted house? I don't feel threatened here. I don't feel unsafe. To me, the presence that can be felt here is always felt gentle and sort of watchful, but not dangerous. So I don't, you know, but you do get the chills every once in a while. You know, you sort of like, we're going to be going up into the attic in a moment to sort of set things up there. And, you know, you kind of want to get in and get out quickly because you feel them sort of around you.
Brian would like to know, what was the name of the blog that you've mentioned several times?
Oh, These Mysterious Hills, and it's by a guy named Joe Derwin, who's been writing about the lore of the region for quite some time, and I definitely recommend that you check out his blog.
Great. All right, well, we're coming up on 7:30. I'm seeing lots of thank yous in the chat.
Thank you.
Let's do this. Robert, do you have any last words for the group before we wrap up?
Like I said, I encourage you to keep your eyes and ears open, your imagination engaged, look for those places of presence, tell those stories, because I think that's so important, especially today. And if you would like to get a copy of the book, Ghosts of the Berkshires, you can find it online. Arcadia Publishing is the company that put it out. You can find it on their website, as well as on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all those places, and at a number of stores here in the Berkshires at the Mounts website and other places. And thank you so much for having me. This was really, I was really happy to be a part of this. Thanks for hosting. Thanks to the friends at Tewksbury Library.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Robert. For everyone on the call, I'll be sending out an email within the next hour with a link to the feedback survey. Please let me know which paranormal authors and investigators and speakers you'd like for next year's series. Also, I'll include a link to the recording in case folks joined us late. And I think that'll just about do it. So thank you so much, Robert. Wonderful job as expected. And I hope your tour tonight goes very well.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here tonight. And happy Halloween.
Yes. So happy Halloween, everyone. We'll give a big virtual round of applause to Robert. And I hope to see many of you at upcoming library virtual programs. So thanks again, Robert.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.